Hi folks, I've been ruminating for a while now about how to ensure I get some more short story roughage into my science fiction diet. My current TBR selection process doesn't have a high chance of turning up short stories, not least because the vast majority of my anthologies are on one long shelf out of 59, and many others are not on shelves at all, merely stacked on top of the shelves, so aren't in the running really via the bingo balls of fate. So how to solve this problem? A few weeks ago I was watching Ollie over at Criminoli introduce a new reading challenge for his channel, which is called My Novel Life, in which he plans to read a book from every year of his life to date. He's about the same age as me but gets through way more books than I do, so it may not take him long to complete this challenge. If I did that at the rate of one book a month, it'd take me several years, I think, to complete the challenge. I therefore more or less dismissed the idea of shamelessly copying his challenge for my own channel, but I decided that I could repurpose it for short stories. I'm excited then to introduce a new challenge for my channel, Life Story, in which I plan to read a short story from each year of my life, starting all the way back in 1971. Yes, my friends, despite all the evidence to the contrary, for example, my full head of blonde, not grey hair, and my perfect unwrinkled skin and my Adonis-like physique and my alert and not at all bloodshot eyes, I really am that old. This Life Story challenge has only one rule, really, I've decided, and that rule is that I'm not allowed to repeat authors. I can read only one story from a given author for this challenge. Not ever, that would be silly, obviously, but as part of this challenge, just one from each author. That should mean that by the end of it, I'll have read stories by 53 different authors, 54 if it takes me until next March to beat the challenge. I'll use the annual awards cycle for a given year to help narrow down my choices, the nominations and the winners for things like the Hugo and the Nebula Award, but I won't be too constrained by that. As much as anything else, I'll be limited by what I happen to have on my shelves in collection or anthology form. I reckon I should be able to squeeze in 5 to 10 short stories among my other reading in a typical month, although of course a lot will depend on the length of those short stories. So I reckon I could get through a decade a month at best. We'll just have to see how I get on. To prime the proverbial pump, I've pre-selected stories to take us to the end of the 1970s. To start us off, for 1971, we have Conquest by Barry and Malzberg, which Robert Silverberg selected for his anthology, New Dimensions 1, and it was then selected again by Harry Harrison and Brian Aldiss for inclusion in their Year's Best Science Fiction Volume 5, which is what I'll be reading. In a short story coincidence, 1971 is also the year that Golden Age guru John W. Campbell sadly died, and aside from my birth, already an event of global significance, I'm sure you'll agree, even more excitement ensued just a couple of days later when Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, God bless her, got to meet me. Yes, that's me there, totally unfazed, whereas she looks quite giddy about the whole thing. I'm 100% certain that she treasured that day for the rest of her considerable life. And it also saw Margaret Thatcher, later our first female Prime Minister, come to the nation's attention by proposing to end the supply of free milk to young school children. The inevitable protest chant became "Thatcher, Thatcher, milk snatcher." And personally, as a child who would later be forced to drink a small bottle of warm milk every day at school, I retrospectively fully support the proposal. But back to the Malzberg story. I think I'm right in saying that this will be the first thing of his that I've read, so I'll be very interested to see how I get on with it. For 1972, I've chosen And I Awoke and Found Me Here on the Cold Hill Side by James Tiptree Jr., which was published in early 1972 and collected in 10,000 Years From Home. This story was nominated for the Nebula Short Story Award in 1972. James Tiptree is of course a nom de plume for Alice Sheldon, and it didn't become widely known that James was a she until 1977. Robert Silverberg famously refused to countenance the notion that Tiptree might be a woman, his writing style being very much that of a man in his opinion. A bit like the Malzberg, I think this will be my first Tiptree short story. Oh mum, will you stop putting photos of me in here? See, this is what happens when you let your mother do the video editing. I dread to think what the gawky teen pictures will be like for the 1980s. So what about 1973? I've picked The Lake of Tuonela by Keith Roberts. More a novelette than a short story. I don't know if it's a good one or not. To my knowledge, it hasn't been nominated for any awards. But based on my limited reading of Keith Roberts so far, I'll bet it's really well written. This story first appeared in New Writings in SF Volume 23, edited by Kenneth Bulmer. For 1974's offering, I first scoured my shelves for a suitable anthology, and I found Nova 4, edited by Harry Harrison, he of the Stainless Steel Rat, amongst others. And this contains several stories from 1974. And from this, I've chosen Robert Sheckley's Slaves of Time, and in common with the other stories in the Nova anthologies, this was its very first appearance in print. 1975 brings some instrumentality in the form of Cordwainer Smith, the story being Down to a Sunless Sea, which was first published in the October 1975 edition of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and later collected in Terry Carr's The Best Science Fiction of the Year, Volume 5, and that's what I will be reading it. And this will be my first Cordwainer Smith, who I think I'm right in saying is mostly known for his short stories, so I think this should be a good one. 1976, the year that I started school, I think. And what does 1976 have to offer in the short storyline? For this, I've picked New Writings in SF, volume 28, mainly because I like the cover, the last few of which were very jazzy and colourful indeed. There are 10 stories in here, all from 1976, but I have chosen the tale from the pen of Brian Aldiss, The Bones of Bertrand Russell. I've read a few of Brian Aldiss's books, but I don't think I've read any of his short stories. But he is, of course, amongst the best writers in British SF, so I shall look forward to that greatly. 1977 was the year of the Queen's Silver Jubilee, my main memory of which was being allowed to stay up until 2 a.m. whilst my parents enjoyed a raucous street party. 1977 was also the year, just about, that Star Wars was released, requiring some subterfuge to get me out the house and to the cinema, involving a highly unusual and most unwelcome second visit to church. It was a Sunday. We marked this occasion with a story from Bob Shaw, Crossing the Line, which was included in Peter Weston's Andromeda 2 anthology, which was published in the same year. I haven't read much Bob Shaw, but I have read Orbitsville and I've read a couple of his other short stories, and I've enjoyed them all, so I'm looking forward to reading this one too. 1978 coughs up a Christopher Priest story, The Negation, which appeared first in his collection An Infinite Summer, and then in revised form in the later collection Dream Archipelago. I have read it in its original form, but this time I'll tackle the updated version. Priest didn't write a lot of short stories, but I can pretty much guarantee that they're all beautifully written. We're coming to the end of the 1970s now, and I am 8 years old, and from time to time I can be found wearing this rather natty Cub Scout uniform, including, as you can see, a cap and sock gaiters. There was absolutely nothing to mock here at all. I was hardly ever teased or beaten up because of it. Hardly ever. For this decade's terminal story, I have decided to read Unaccompanied Sonata by Orson Scott Card, which was first published in Omni magazine in March 1979 and found here in a collection of the same name, which was published in 1981. This story, Unaccompanied Sonata, was also nominated for the Hugo in 1980. I've only read a couple of Orson Scott Card's books, Ender's Game, of course, and Speaking for the Dead, both of which I've enjoyed immensely, so I am looking forward to reading some of his short stories. So that is the first tranche of stories teed up. What do you think about this challenge? Have you read any of these stories or others by the same authors? Do let me know. As always, I'll be interested to hear from you. Once I've got this lot under my belt, I shall be back to let you know what I thought, and I'll probably rank them in some arbitrary fashion. And then we'll take a look at the stories that I pick for the 1980s, the decade of the new romantics, synth pop, rampant consumerism, and hair metal. All right, let's get this done. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.